2. Scholasticism. It is this characteristic that has led scholars to describe Boethius as the first scholastic. The scholastics, moreover, had an academic orientation which brings him closer to the 20th century era than to any other age. Intellectual inquiry was directed primarily to the analysis and critique of what other scholars had to say about any question, rather than to satisfying either the question of the naive mind or of practical living. The inquiry could be rationalistic, empirical, and theoretical or practical, but it was always academically oriented. Moreover, the scholastic, as well as much of the medieval world, were marked by the eminence of youthfulness. Piper has well described this aspect of medieval thought. We happen on another surprising element in the history of medieval philosophy when we consider Abelard and Bernard, namely, how young these writers and magistri were when they began their public activity. Nothing is wider of the mark than the image of white, bearded monks sitting in cells remote from the bustle of the world and penning on parchment their tractates. Boethius was all of 20 years old when he wrote the first of his books, which were to influence so many centuries to come. He began the commentaries on Aristotle at 25. At 30, Anselm of Canterbury was prior in Lubeck. Bonaventura, already a university teacher at 27, was called at the age of 36 to be general of a Franciscan order that had already spread throughout the entire West. Duns Scotus wrote his principal work, the enormous Opus Oxoniense, at the age of 35, and William of Ockham was only 25 when he turned his back for good upon his distinguished career in science and letters. Youthfulness flourishes in a deeply rooted culture which has vitality and communicates it readily and early to its sons. A dying culture or a new one is often dominated by age, by older men, in that it takes men longer, amid the shaking foundations and rubble, to develop roots and to establish their thinking in terms of them. Despite their asceticism at times and their celibacy, medieval students and masters were far more at home in the world than our 20th century humanists. Some, indeed, feared that they were too much at home in the world. With many, however, there was instead a progressive extension of the claims of Christian man in the world and over the world. St. Thomas Aquinas, 1224 or 1225 to 1274, clearly represented this approach. In 1263, Pope Urban IV, a champion of this concept, reminded scholars that the decree of 1231 of Pope Gregory IX, while it forbade the teaching of Aristotle as mediated by the Arabs, called for scholars to examine and interpret Aristotle for the faith. William of Moerbeke and Thomas Aquinas were summoned to the papal court to assume the task of assimilating Aristotle into the Christian world of thought. Aquinas' purpose reflected a supreme confidence, a confidence shared by many that an establishment of Christian truth upon the foundation of the reason of autonomous man was possible. The reason of autonomous man could, it was held, establish the truths of revelation out of a sense experience and by the empirical method.